Chapter 27 Retribution. Despite the insistence he was ready, it still took Ryan nearly a half an hour to mentally prepare himself to see the smiling bastard's face again. He hoped he wouldn't be smiling when he saw him. He knew he wouldn't be smiling for long if he was. Ryan spent some time gathering things that may be useful. He knew there would be at least a 6-sided dice somewhere in the locker where they kept spare stuff. There was always a board game or two in each safe house. It kept them from growing crazy in case they had to hole up for a long time. He rummaged through the locker until he found the musty old Monopoly box and retrieved the dice, pocketing it. There was a generator around the side of the main warehouse that ran on diesel. Jack had indicated there was extra fuel for it around somewhere. Perfect. He had Jack leave a jerry can half full of it outside the shed where Shadles was being kept. He also pocketed a book of matches, but only after Jack had made him promise he wouldn't burn down the lumberyard. He borrowed Michael's knife, his own having been lost somewhere before he was rescued from the warehouse, he realized with a sudden sense of regret. Ray had gotten him the knife after noticing him fawning over it while running reconnaissance for a heist to obtain new weapons. It had been a risky move for Ray to get it, but he'd actually turned out to be a pretty good thief after some instruction from Gavin. Ryan had only found out after the fact how much effort Ray had gone to in order to swipe it, and even then, through Gavin. The memory of Ray brought with it fresh rage, driving Ryan's need for vengeance as he remembered Ray's pained last moments. Before he left the annex, Lindsay had run back to the car to bring him his jacket and mask, which she'd picked up from the other safe house. She was a saint. He welcomed his jacket, but left the mask. If he was going to do this, it was as Ryan, not the vagabond. Ryan wheeled himself out to the shed, Jeff following closely behind, standing at the door with his pistol loaded and his hunting knife at his hip. He'd promised not to intervene unless Ryan needed him to. Michael, Jack, Jeremy, and Gavin had tied Shadles to the pole-like chimney of the furnace in the center of the room, the same way they had to Jeremy the last time they'd been there. However, this time they sat him in a chair so Ryan could be at eye level with him. Shadles laughed weakly at the sight of Ryan as he entered. The vagabond survived. Who'd have thought? Looks like I did a number on you, though. His voice was soft and shaky, but he sounded determined. Ryan could see Shadles had been beaten by the guys sometime between getting him out of the car and tying him up, although he suspected it was largely Michael's doing. He was thankful for it. He doubted he'd have the strength to do an adequate job himself. Ryan was unmoved. Like I said, it takes a lot to kill me. As Jeff relaxed against the doorframe, Shadles nodded to him. You gonna get your boss to do your dirty work for you? Jeff chuckled. Oh, believe me, I would love for him to let me. If you think I need my legs to make you scream and beg for death, you're severely underestimating me, Ryan said lightly. He smiled, and there was nothing warm about it. Don't worry, there's plenty I can do just like this. Shadles looked ragged. He was clearly in pain already. His mousy brown hair stuck out all over his head, and he was nursing a swelling black eye and a split lip. There were bloodstains marring the smooth gray fabric of his suit pants and vest. One pant leg was covered in blood up to the knee. Jeff had mentioned that Lawrence shot his ankle. Ryan noted it as a weak spot. The bridge of his nose was swollen and bloody from an older injury, probably sustained back at the warehouse, and was another point he could potentially exploit. Ryan had Michael's knife for the time being, but it was the only real weapon he had brought with him. He had no intention of making this quick. Ryan smiled darkly. You should have killed me when you had the chance. Go ahead, then, Shadles spluttered out. Finish it. No, Ryan said flatly, wheeling himself closer. You don't get to die yet. First, I want to know why. All I wanted was retribution, Shadles said simply. Yeah? Well, that makes two of us, Ryan replied stonily. He used the butt of the knife to strike the shin above Shadles' broken ankle, eliciting a cry of pain he was unable to stifle. Why? He repeated with a growl. I told you why, Shadles gasped out. Ryan wheeled himself around the furnace to where Shadles' hands were bound behind him. Duct tape held his wrists together above the joint with his palms facing out. Ryan gripped his left little and ring fingers and twisted them away from the rest of his hand slightly, just enough to make Shadles twitch. No, you gave me a bullshit cop-out answer for the camera, to make you look like some kind of hero. Ryan took Michael's razor-sharp knife and began to slowly slice into the fleshy webbing between Shadles' middle finger and ring finger. Shadles grunted and groaned through the pain, keeping his mouth shut just as Ryan had so determinedly done during his own torment. Ryan carefully positioned the blade to separate the bones of his knuckles, twisting them apart with a soft crack and popping sound as the tendons gave way beneath the blade, eliciting a sharp, swiftly stifled scream from Shadles. Ryan grinned and continued to saw through the hand another inch or so, essentially splitting it down the middle, blood dripping off the mangled fingers, leaving dotwork patterns on the concrete floor below. Jeff looked away. He was uncomfortable watching. He didn't want to intervene, but this was a side of Ryan he hadn't seen up close before. Frankly, it scared him. When Ryan was satisfied, he gently pried the newly separated fingers apart, hearing the bones creak against one another, until Shadles finally let out an anguished scream he couldn't muffle. The sound echoed in the steel and concrete shed, and Ryan smiled at the thought that it would have probably been audible in the main warehouse. Shadles doubled over with pain, chest heaving as he struggled to maintain his breath and heart rate, leaning forward as if physically pushing himself further away from his butchered hand would make the pain feel more distant. I want to know, Ryan continued casually, quietly relishing in a moment of glorious personal victory as he wheeled himself back around the furnace. What was it exactly that I did to you? You don't do what you did to me unless it's personal. Shadles slowly collected himself, and with great effort straightened up. After a long pause, steadying his breath and nerves, he glared right back at Ryan through watery eyes and swallowed. You said you were happy to play the villain, he stammered out, still defiant. But I don't think that's true. I don't think you and I are so different. We're just loyal to different sides. Ryan twitched, holding back with all his resolution. They were using the same tactics, pushing all the same buttons. This was going to get him nowhere unless he could get into his head. You know, for someone who hates me so much, you sure tried your hardest to become me. Shadle snorted. It takes a monster to destroy a monster. I wanted to make you pay. Ryan sneered. He was still avoiding the question. So, I'm a monster. Fair call. What was it then? Was it a slow build? He ventured, watching us wreak havoc on the evening news. Maybe you witnessed one of our heists firsthand and decided enough was enough. Shadles was shutting him out now. The blank look on his face gave Ryan nothing to go off, so he switched tactics, thinking back to the things Shadles had said at the warehouse when he was the one in the chair. I want you to think about every act that you've committed, every person that you've hurt, every family you've torn apart, that might make someone want to hurt you as badly as I do. That was worth a shot. No, this is proper vengeance. Who was it? Your partner? Your child? Which family member did the fake age crew take from you? That hit a nerve. Ryan could see it in his eyes. There was a fire there now. Oh, so I'm close. Ryan smiled that sick, crooked smile, brandishing the blood-smeared knife. He started to wheel himself back around to Shadles' hands, and even Jeff felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Shadles realized where this was going and quickly relented. My brother! Ryan paused and moved back to face him, and he relaxed ever so slightly. Twin, actually, he continued with a gasp. You know how they say twins have a special bond? It's true, we did. Until you showed up. We were responding to a robbery at the Maze Bank by the fake AH crew. Ryan raised an eyebrow, shaking his head with disbelief. You were a cop? He nodded curtly. We both were. Ryan and Jeff exchanged a glance. The fakes were inside, We had the place surrounded. We thought we'd finally won, until the vagabond turned up. He weakly coughed a laugh that sounded painful. We'd heard rumors, but we didn't think they were true. You killed 9 officers that day. My brother was one of them. And for all that, the fake AHQ got away. He spat the last words. Jeff cringed slightly. He remembered the day well. It was before Ryan had joined the crew. It was how he'd gotten on their radar. They would have been royally fucked if Ryan hadn't happened to show up when he had. His little killing spree kept the LSPD distracted long enough for the crew to get away. Jeff had personally spent months tracking him down afterwards, but ultimately, that day was what had earned Ryan his spot on the crew. So what? The cops couldn't, or maybe wouldn't, touch us? Because let's face it, they're not exactly upstanding citizens themselves. And you decided to take matters into your own hands? Something like that? Ryan probed. Shadles nodded, groaning in pain. Something like that. Ryan scoffed a laugh. Good cop gone rogue, sees himself as the hero. I've heard this storyline before somewhere. A bit cliche, don't you think? Cliches exist for a reason, I suppose. Touché. Ryan mused, something else now playing on his mind as he reminisced the early days of the crew. Did you kill Ray? Does it matter? Shadles retorted. Ryan ignored him, continuing his line of questioning. You tried to recruit him. Why? Shadles smiled that smile, and Ryan wanted so badly to punch him in the face, but held back. We could have used a sniper. God, I wanted him to turn against you. It would have been so sweet, but no, he confessed almost proudly. In the end, his loyalty cost him his life. It was all a sick game to him. You dump truck of shit of a human being, Jeff growled, his hand instinctively moving to settle on the hilt of his knife. Ryan flinched, but managed to restrain himself physically, and spoke very slowly and deliberately. This doesn't end here, tonight. Not for you. As much pain as you think you're in now, I promise I'm going to make it tenfold worse. Just when you think you can't possibly live through another second of agony, I will find a way to make it start all over again. Ryan enunciated every syllable of every word. I am going to ruin you down to your soul, so that the devil himself will have to scrape up the pathetic leftovers to stake his claim to you. After what I do to you, even an eternity in hell will seem like a relief. Ryan's face was plastered with a sick grin, despite the turmoil he felt inside. I have a very creative imagination. But first, because it'll make me feel better. He returned to Shadle's bound hands and got to work, repeating the process of separating the fingers on his right hand. He worked more deliberately this time, making sure Shadles felt every little tear of the knife as he screamed and writhed in agony, no longer attempting to hide the pain. When he was done, Ryan wheeled himself back around to face Shadles and wiped his brow with the back of his still bloody hand, leaving a faint smear across his forehead. I've always been a fan of symmetry, you see. Actually, he wasn't particularly, but it sounded cool. Shadles was hissing obscenities through clenched teeth, thrashing around wildly as tears ran down his face and stung his eyes. Part of Ryan felt a little better. Jeff thought he was going to be sick. So, Ryan started, drawing a deep breath. I like your take on Russian roulette. I don't have a revolver, but I think we can still make a game of this. He pulled the dice from his pocket. Now, what to do? He absent-mindedly fiddled with the dice, throwing it in the air and catching it a few times as he pondered. I've never done a Colombian necktie before. That's where you slit the throat of your victim. He traced a finger along Shadle's neck to imitate, and pull their tongue through the wound before they either bleed out or drown in their own blood. I'm not entirely convinced it's physically possible, but it's always worth a shot, I suppose. That'll be if we roll a 1. Shadow's eyes widened as he realized the extent of the game, and he swallowed hard. Ryan continued, If we roll a 2, I think I might get a little bit Reservoir Dogs up in here and burn you alive. 3 could be drowning in the sink. I've heard that's not pleasant, but it's simple enough. Ryan could hear himself speaking. It was his voice, but he wasn't so certain they were entirely his words. It sounded like something he would say, but somehow it all felt surreal, and he momentarily wondered if he might actually be dreaming. But there was the pain, omnipresent and dull in his head and muscles, more acute in his ribs. If he was dreaming, it was certainly vivid. A roll of 4 earns you a gut shot and a slow bleed out. 5, a shot to the chest. You might get lucky and it'll hit your heart. If we roll a 6, of course, you can choose your own adventure. I can make it quick and painless if that's how you want it. A simple shot to the head, it'll be over before you know it. A chill ran down Jeff's spine. Ryan sounded so casual about it, like he was explaining the setup for a game of D&D, not actually describing how he planned on ending someone's life. We'll roll it for now, so you can get that feeling of anticipation, knowing what you're in for. But I'm not going to kill you until I'm ready. Ryan tossed the dice loosely in his hand. Before we roll it, Shadle stammered out, interrupting the roll. Just one thing. I answered your question. Now I have one for you. Ryan raised an eyebrow, knowing full well he shouldn't give him the opportunity. He couldn't help himself, though. Sheer curiosity prevented him from saying no. Jeff frowned. He could practically see the wheels turning in Ryan's head, knowing he couldn't resist the urge to fuck with him some more. He almost wanted to step in. Shadle's eyes flickered to Jeff as if weighing the consequences of his next words, but he remained stony-faced. How did it feel when I broke you? Ryan scoffed. You think you broke me? It takes more than some rank amateur with a jerry can and a revolver to break one of us. Shadle smiled that smile, and Ryan felt his stomach twist involuntarily. That's not what I was talking about, he wheezed and cleared his throat. How does it feel, knowing that I've marked you for what you are, for all to see? A traitor? Ryan recoiled, just the same way he had in the warehouse, and it made him feel ill that he still had that power over him. It's not true. Bullshit, Jeff snapped instinctively. You still don't want to believe me. Don't you see, Shadles continued, not breaking eye contact with Ryan. They all walked right into our trap for you, knowingly even. That's the kind of risk you are to your crew. One way or another, you will be their downfall. Jeff's eyes went wide and his head snapped around to Ryan, hoping to see some kind of denial or defiance, something that indicated he wasn't buying it. But Ryan was frozen, the helpless look on his face confirming Shadle's words had gotten through. Jeff's heart sank. Shadles continued. The look on your face when I showed you the photo. I know it was brief. You're a good actor, I'll give you that. But that look, that acceptance. I'd seen it before. It was the same look that Ray had right after he shot you. Right after he found out it wasn't you who shot first. When he realized how much of a threat he was. Ryan lashed out, striking Shadles across the face with a backhand that would have knocked him off his feet had he been standing. What is he talking about, Ryan? Jeff asked cautiously. Ryan snorted, and his hand instinctively shot up to touch where he'd been branded, feeling the scarred skin beneath the bandage, knowing the mark would be there forever. A permanent reminder of how little he was trusted, even by the people he trusted the most. To both their shock, Shadles laughed weakly. Go on, Ryan. Tell him. Tell him how I branded you the same way he did. A single word carries so much weight, doesn't it? Traitor. Judas. Go on. Show him, Ryan. Ryan's fingers traced the edge of the bandage, scratching at the inflamed skin where the adhesive contacted. Jeff followed the movement with his eyes. Ryan couldn't have said why he did it, but he obeyed. He slowly peeled the edge of the cover away, revealing the raised, scarred tissue, pink and puffy and grotesque. Judas. It was like the wounds of the past had been dredged up, their scabs ripped away and exposed to the sting of fresh air again. Would they ever heal? That smile crept over Shadow's lips. It really suits him, wouldn't you agree, Jeff? Ryan's usual eloquence deserted him in his rage. Fuck you. He spat the words. Jeff could feel his blood boil. Ryan looked ready to tear him apart with his bare hands. Jeff was quicker. In one movement, Jeff took his knife, which was probably not as sharp or well-maintained as Michael's, in his left hand and a fistful of Shadow's hair in his right, and plunged the knife into his right eye socket. Shadow's convulsed, furiously shaking his head, twisting futilely against his bonds, crying out unintelligible noises, before Jeff thrust the knife further in, burying the 7-inch blade up to the hilt into his skull. Shadle seized violently before going completely stiff and finally slumping back against the chimney, a blank, serene expression overcoming what was left of his youthful face. Ryan was silent, shocked, impressed that Jeff had it in him, furious it hadn't been him. For a long time neither of them said anything. Ryan was shaking, with fear, rage, adrenaline. Was he glad Shadles was dead? He didn't know. He couldn't work out what was going on inside his head. He didn't have to. What happened next seemed like it happened at a distance, like he was watching someone else play a video game in first person, or like some virtual reality game with a cutscene and you just along for the ride. Jeff turned to face him, an apologetic look on his face. I know you wanted, he began, but Ryan cut him off with a growl. He was mine, Jeff. Jeff took a sharp breath, surprised at the force in his words. I know, buddy. I'm sorry, but He deserved to suffer for what he did to us. Jeff nodded solemnly. No argument there. Ryan wheeled himself closer to the body, reaching for the knife still embedded in his face, pulling it free and wiping the gore on Shadle's motionless shoulder. He was supposed to plead for his life. He was supposed to beg for mercy. Ryan's voice had gotten quiet, reflective, dark. And when I finally decided to end him, it would have been merciful. Jeff instinctively took a few steps back, something dangerously close to fear swelling up inside him. Look, Ryan, he said in a gentle but firm voice that masked his unease. It's over. Ryan went deathly silent, a slight tremor in his hands as he slowly balled them into fists and let out a long exhale. In a way, it was more terrifying than anything he could have said. Jeff felt his blood run cold. Ryan suddenly shuddered and dropped the knife, almost throwing it from his hand like it was red hot. It fell with a loud clatter to the ground. Jeff hesitated. He'd seen something there for a split second, something he wasn't used to seeing in Ryan. Fear. Ryan, are you okay? No. There was a long silence. Eventually, Ryan's gaze softened and he nodded, staring off into the distance. He ran a hand through his hair. Yeah, I'm okay. He reached up and carefully smoothed the adhesive pad back over the brand, the skin still swollen and burning, his cold hands soothing over it. Jeff relaxed, carefully picked up the knife and gripped the back of the wheelchair, steering it towards the door. He took one final look at Shadles before closing the door behind him. Ryan didn't sleep the rest of the night. He continued to lie on his cot, staring at the ceiling, replaying what happened in his mind. There was little he could do to shake the mental image that had burned itself into his brain. Look, Ryan, it's over. It wasn't over. It would never really be over. In that moment, he had pictured himself stabbing Jeff. It was vivid, visceral. He'd almost been able to feel his muscles going through the movements, Jeff's warm blood pulsing out in spurts through his fingers as he dug the knife into his abdomen, twisted it, an animalistic snarl escaping his lips. What the fuck was that? How close had he come to going through with it? One way or another, you will be their downfall. He shuddered to think. Still, sleep eluded him.